So I'm here today with Shayla Archer, who is a former University of Utah Division I collegiate swimmer. And she had a number of injuries that she's going to talk a little bit about today. Shayla's also a master's student, she graduated from her master's program in health promotion here at the University of Utah. And I'm really pleased and honored that you're here with us today to share your experiences and your insights. So thank you for being here.
My pleasure. Super happy to be here.
Thanks. Maybe you can tell us, Shayla, a little bit more about your athletic background and experience.
Absolutely. So I began swimming at a fairly high level with starting competitions when I was 10. And I trained with a club team year-round from that age until I reached college. And during that time, I would do, so all through, like, I would say ages 10 to, I don't know when high school started, 14. I would do year-round club swimming, and that was my only training. And then once I got to high school, we had the high school season and then also the club season. And so I would do, high school was a 3-month season, and then the rest of the year round, I would do club swimming. And in that time, each year I would probably take like a total of 4 weeks off, kind of spaced out throughout the year. I'd say the longest break that I would take at a time would be about 2 weeks. So it was a really high level from a pretty young age. And I started doing doubles, which like 2-a-days, with just two workouts per day. I think I started with 1 day a week when I was about 11, and then moved on to slowly increase from there. And I think the maximum being in college, it was like 4 or 5 days where there would be 2 workouts per day. Mm-hmm. And then I was recruited to swim for the University of Utah and came to Salt Lake City from Washington, Bainbridge Island, Washington. And I swam for almost 4 full years. And that's why we're here talking, is because my swimming career was cut short by a concussion. And I was primarily a backstroker, primarily a sprinter. Once I got kind of like into high school and college, where you're more kind of specialized. Anything else I should touch on there?
Yeah, it sounds like you had a high volume of training from a pretty young age before you even got to university.
For sure, yes. And it felt, I actually kind of think about that often. I think about how, like, I didn't put it together conceptually somehow, that like once I had to put in so much work to just get to college, that felt like, oh, I made it. Like I succeeded. I made it to college swimming. I get to swim at a Division I school. I get a scholarship. I get to do this. I'm here. And then it was like, oh shit, I have to maintain this. Like I have to stay at this crazy level for another 4 years. So that was a big learning curve, I think, for me.
Did you feel some pressure to stay or maintain a certain level of performance?
Definitely. And I think high school was kind of like a slow build up to like a really big success. I won the state championship in the 100 backstroke. Our team did really well, and it was like this big kind of culmination. And then coming into college, it was definitely, I wasn't as fast as other people who were coming in from other states and other schools and all over the place. So it was certainly an adjustment. And I felt like the first year was kind of just like getting my feet under me.
Right. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about some of your performances once you got to university and some of your accomplishments.
Sure, yeah. So my freshman year in college, I, um, let's see, I was swimming lifetime bests at our Pac-12 is like our championship meet at the end of the season at Pac-12s. I was a part of a school record breaking medley relay my freshman year and placed in the top 16 in the Pac-12 in the 100 backstroke. And that's was a big deal to me and like kind of like bigger picture. And just basically making finals at Pac-12s is like an accomplishment that I was proud of.
Sure.
um, and those Pac-12 for meets were actually at my home pool from high school, which was a really cool thing. And then into sophomore year, I had a little bit of a kind of a blip, I would say, in performance. I lost a lot of weight really quickly at the beginning of my sophomore year. And it seemed like I kind of lost some muscle and feel with that. Like I lost something like 20 pounds in like 2 months, I want to say. So it was definitely an adjustment. And at the mid-season meet, I didn't do as well. And then um, I'm trying to think timeline wise. I want to say, yeah, it was that February of my sophomore year that I got my first concussion. And so that like Pac-12 meet was the day after I got the concussion. And so it was obviously like a 4-day meet. So I wasn't swimming the day after, but it was very close. So that obviously didn't go as well. And there were also a couple injuries that season leading up to it. It was just kind of a weird year, and definitely just a challenging time trying to figure out what was going on and how to swim fast.
Mm-hmm.
And then junior year, so that summer I took off a fair amount of time in order to recover from the concussion. And then into the junior year, I was swimming pretty well. We had a new sprint coach. I was really excited about him. And I ended up getting a second concussion at our mid-season meet, which, just to back up a little bit, there's essentially like the season runs August of like the start of the school year. And then November-ish, there's typically what we call mid-season, which is like the big swim meet at the middle of the season, and then runs on through February. At the end of February is Pac-12s, just for kind of like time frame.
Mm-hmm.
So anyways, got the second concussion at that November meet, and it had gone amazing. Like up to that point, I was swimming best times and doing really well, and I was really excited. And the race that I actually got the concussion in, I was in like a finals heat, and should have like their video, and I was winning the race, and then I took an extra stroke on backstroke, and instead of finishing with my hand, I finished with the top of my head,
Mm-hmm.
which isn't advisable.
Right.
So that kind of slowed things down and put a damper on the rest of the season. Rest of the season obviously didn't go very well from that point on because I had to take some time off to recover again. And then it was just really hard to regain, the strength training, weight training, all the cardio and everything that I had missed during that time off. I missed a good deal of winter training because that was when I was trying to recover, and that was really kind of the time in the season where you ramp up and kind of gain strength before then you kind of taper down for the competition again in February. And then for my senior year, I was really excited, trying to get it, like this is my last shot to have a good season. And I ended up getting that third concussion in October of my senior year, which is the season had barely started, it felt like. So I ended up kind of changing my role as part of the team. So instead of being an athlete, I was helping coach every afternoon. And I'm also a certified yoga teacher. So I started teaching yoga for the team every weekend. So that was kind of my journey. And I have swum maybe like I would say 5 times since. Like I really haven't gotten back in the water very much.
Yeah. You've touched on a number of really interesting points, Shayla, and obviously you've been unfortunate to experience multiple concussions. Maybe you can just take us back to your first concussion.
Sure.
What happened? What caused it?
So the first one, I was in a car accident and the other driver was drunk. And that was like, thank goodness, the worst thing that happened to me, was a concussion, and it was fairly severe. Looking back now that I've had 3 and I can kind of remember the differences between all of them. The first one was, I hit my head essentially on like the corner of where the car door closes. And so the impact was really hard. I didn't lose consciousness or anything in the moment, but I had just a pounding headache. It happened in maybe around 8 p.m. And I had just a headache from then until I went to practice in the morning at 6 a.m. And I got in the pool and I swam. We were just doing kind of like a shakeout swim just to loosen up, warm up for the day. And I mentioned to my coach, I was like, yeah, I got into a car accident. I'm okay, but my head's been hurting. I didn't even really put it together that I had hit my head, but I just knew that I was really hurt. And I remember the water felt really good on it. So I kind of wanted to swim longer because it was cool and it kind of relieved some of the pressure that I was feeling. And so my coach ended up talking to our athletic trainer, which was a very good move on his part, and they were really concerned. And so he had me get out. And when you come to college, they do a concussion baseline for everybody, which is a really good idea. And so I took the assessment again to compare to my baseline that I had taken as a freshman. And it was, I wish I had the score in front of me, but I want to say it was something like on one of the areas in particular, my baseline was 0, meaning like good.
Right.
And when I took it again, it was like 100 and something, meaning not good at all.
off the charts.
Off the charts, very bad.
Yeah.
And I remember it was so hard to sit there and stare at the computer and take the test. It was like physically painful, and I kept having to like kind of mentally and almost physically shake myself to make myself keep going. And yeah, that was the first one. And I remember I went to the doctor with my trainer, and the doctor was pretty kind of flippant and not like, my biggest concern was wanting to go and be able to swim at Pac-12s. And I think equal parts feeling like I did want that, like I was ready and excited to swim, but then also feeling like I should really force that and I should be asking about that because that was the expectation of me at the time. Like, from coaches, and there's a specific squad that's chosen to go to the Pac-12 meet. So I felt kind of a sense of like, I've been picked for this, I better show up, essentially. And the doctor was really, I said something to the effect of, can I go? Is it going to be fine? Like, am I able to swim? And he's like, oh no, definitely, like, obviously not. And I just remembered this, like, just waves of emotion and just sobbing. kind of uncontrollably and out of the blue for like, it didn't really warrant that, which is a pretty big concussion symptom, is like extreme emotion and uncontrollable. And so that was very real and very strong. And I was just feeling kind of like raw the whole day. I felt like just so exhausted, and I had classes and stuff, so I couldn't go home and sleep. And my car was also really damaged, so I had to get it towed from the accident. So I was relying on people to drive me if I needed to go home. It was just, and I didn't have a roommate at the time, so it was just me. It was just this whole thing. So I ended up staying on campus the whole day, and I was just exhausted and drained and overwhelmed, and just mentally like shot. And I ended up going to Pac-12s the next day. So the accident happened on a Sunday evening, and then we left for Pac-12s on a Tuesday morning. And I remember I had to wear earplugs and sunglasses to the airport. And one of my coaches like came up to me. I remember this so clearly, and he was like, "You're good? You're good to go?" Like, "Yeah, we're ready." And I was like, "No, I'm not. Like, I'm in so much pain. I'm miserable. I'm not ready. Like, no." This, just because I'm here doesn't mean it's thumbs up and like we're good to go.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm interested on that. You described some of your symptoms, Shayla, with headache and
Yeah.
having difficulty taking a cognitive test the day after your concussion and feeling a wave of emotions come over you.
Right.
And then also all of the other challenges, like not having a roommate or your car compounding some of your symptoms.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you can describe or just reiterate whether there were other symptoms that you experienced as a result of the concussion.
Yeah, I think especially in the beginning, there was just that headache. It just seemed like it lasted for weeks. It didn't seem like it ever really went away. Um, and and it was primarily like kind of concentrated across my forehead and into my eyes, as well as like I could feel myself holding it in the base of my neck. And that's if I get stressed or overwhelmed, that's where I hold stress in my body. Like an hour ago, I was feeling that. And we're over 4 years out from that.
Was that
Um,
different before the concussion?
Yeah, I would get headaches occasionally, but certainly not to the degree that I have experienced post-concussion. And I'm also curious if I am hypersensitive to them now because I'm like scared of having any concussion symptoms or anything like that. I don't think there were any other major symptoms beyond the headache, and there was definite like emotional up and downs pretty much any concussion that I had, as well as the recovery time. And then there was certainly just like um there's a concussion kind of like scale of a list of a bunch of different items, and I'm just remembering the fatigue, and then the like fog is what they call it, just brain fog. I never felt like I would sleep. There was one day I slept for something like with naps, and then also my nighttime sleep, it was something like 20 hours in like a 24-hour period. And I never felt rested. I never felt like ready to wake up and ready to go. So
Yeah,
those were definitely main ones.
it sounds debilitating.
Absolutely. Yes.
So I'm curious, Shayla, how did it come to pass that you essentially failed the test, this baseline concussion test,
Yeah.
and then 2 days later you're still on the plane and headed to it was the Pac-12 meet, is that correct?
Yeah.
How did
Um,
that happen?
that's a good question. And I'm not sure. I think it was a combination of things. I think that I was really pushing for it, and I also think that um, there hadn't been a concussion on the team before that, like in my time there, or like that I knew about previously. Um, and the team also didn't have one athletic trainer. So this athletic trainer that we had was new. And he was still in school and he didn't have any experience with people having concussions. And the coaches didn't, like speak up and say, hey, this is a big deal. So nobody was really operating with much information to my knowledge. And I think that they were a little bit scared of telling me no. And I think that I was a little bit scared of telling them no as well. So I don't think anybody was really able to communicate and make sure everything was in my best interests. Was
Right.
kind of what it came down to.
It sounds like there was maybe uncertainty about the
Yes,
nature of your injury, or a lack of information being
absolutely.
communicated between you, maybe the coaches.
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think that that's accurate. And I think that there was I didn't break a bone. There was no, like, I guess maybe they could have done like an MRI or something to show swelling, but there wasn't really anything tangible that someone could point to and say, hey, look, it's this bad, or like this is the problem and this is the measure that's problematic and she can't do X if it's at this level. So there was no real, like, it was basically just up to me to say, I feel terrible and I can't do this. And I didn't say that.
Why not?
I think that it was a couple of things. I think that I was really eager to please and do the right thing, um, in the eyes of my coaches, and make sure, like, I had a terrible midseason meet before, as I mentioned. And so I think I was really feeling a lot of pressure to, like, prove my worth, essentially. So I think that that came into play. I think that for my own sake, I just wanted to do well, and I wanted to feel good. I hadn't felt good in the water and felt good at a meet and been proud of something that I'd done in a really long time. So I think that I was a little bit just stubborn and, like, thought that I could do it.
Mm. And so you went to the meet, and you said it occurred over a 4-day span. Is that correct?
Yes. And during, like, I didn't, to the coaches and everybody's credit, I didn't come to the meet outside of the one day that I was competing. So I stayed in the hotel room in the dark, and even on the day that I did come, I, like, kind of stayed in the locker room where it was quieter and kept my great getup of earplugs and sunglasses inside on, and that was helpful for me to be kind of protected a little bit.
Tell us a little bit about what happened at the meet and then after.
Um, so I came and I warmed up, and I remember I just felt kind of like out of sorts is the best way I can describe it. But I didn't feel so bad that I was like, oh, I can't do this. And so I, warmed up, went through all my usual motions. And I remember our athletic trainer was being really, like, he would not leave me, basically. Like, he was right next to me the whole time. And I think he was pretty uncomfortable with me doing what I was doing, but I think he may not have, like, I don't think he put together that it was going to be a problem until I was there, and it was kind of too late and it was happening. And so he was like walked with me to the blocks and everything, and I just kind of ignored him and was like doing my own usual routine, like just trying to have the best race that I could. And I got up and got in and swam. And I felt pretty good on the first 50. It was 100 back, and I felt pretty good on the first 50. And then I just had nothing at the end. And I remember going back over to the coaches and talking to them after the race, and our head coach was like, well, that was a gutsy first 50. Like you went for it, at least I can tell you that. And they were as, we were all just kind of like one big shrug of like, that was the best I could do. And it
Yeah.
really wasn't a bad swim. Like, I think it was definitely in like my top 5 times of the season. And like was comparative to a best time or what I would have gone if I'd been healthy. And yeah, and so from there, I think I just kind of cooled down, and I didn't make finals, and that was okay. And I just went back to the hotel and tried to heal.
And how did you feel in terms of your symptoms after the race?
I mean, pretty bad from what I can remember. I don't remember super clearly, but I remember it was really hard to be in the pool environment. It's a massive facility and just like super loud, and it's really echoey. So it was a really bad environment, very bright. I remember that being another really big symptom for me. Like I couldn't look at my phone or computer. And I'm still very sensitive to light, and like driving at night has been a lasting symptom for me that's been challenging. So yeah, it was, and I remember like just psychologically it was really hard to be around the team and like in that environment, knowing that I wasn't like really able to participate and I wasn't really contributing.
Mhm. You've talked or you made the point earlier that it wasn't a broken bone or something identifiable in terms of the severity.
Right.
And I wonder if the nature of concussion makes it uncertain in terms of the prognosis or the recovery,
Yes.
the severity.
Definitely, definitely. And I think that's something that I struggled with every concussion that I had. It was never, it was always up to me if I was cleared, essentially. It wasn't ever like there was a scale, like I mentioned before. I can't remember what it's called, but I'm fairly sure it's a standardized measurement. And leading up to after the first concussion, leading up to that swim, I was taking the scale like twice a day, I want to say. And that was part of what our athletic trainer was comfortable clearing me to go ahead and swim, is because the score, which is all self-reported, just by the way. um, Key point there. He was able to let me swim based on the score going down. Um, Anyways, so I am sorry, I kind of forgot your question.
Well, just the point was about the uncertainties of
Yes.
the nature of concussion and how that affects your recovery or your prognosis.
Yes. So I think it's just one of the hardest things that you can have to deal with, because I personally naturally have kind of like a self-critical mind, and so it's only exacerbated by the concussion, because um, like I would just be constantly self-doubting whether I was good enough to go ahead and keep swimming, to start swimming, or if I like, am I making this up? Am I fine? Like it was just all very challenging to figure out, and there was never I don't know, it was just all kind of up to me and my trainer to decide what to do. And it was really, really hard to every day have to tell teammates who are just trying to like show support. They would ask like when you're coming back or like how you're doing, and it's like this answer is the same every time, and it's really, I don't know, and I'm okay, like I guess it's fine. So
Yeah, and so that self-doubt you mentioned, I think is interesting. It sounds like that impacts the uncertainty of it all, or that you're sort of really unsure. You said about, am I making this up, or is it
right.
as bad as I think it is? Is that kind
Yeah,
of accurate?
I think I think it was really I was already having kind of a hard time with that season mentally, just like not doing very well at mid-season and just feeling kind of down about swimming in general and trying to find my way. And so to add a concussion onto that, I was scared. I think that I was um, like oh, here's my excuse, like now I get to have a break, and I'm okay, now that I'm not swimming, um, and and I don't think that that was the case really, but it was also certainly a narrative that was really hard to shake in my head, and also to worry that that's what other people were thinking too.
Yeah. So you've in many ways spoken to this question, but I want to ask it explicitly. What are some of the challenges in particular about dealing with concussion and recovery from it?
I would say the primary thing is the lack of a physical problem or like physical damage. And I would say it's also the impacts of it are um, like depression is a very common symptom of concussions. And I think anytime you're dealing with I mean, it's a mild traumatic brain injury. So anytime you're dealing with brain things, there's a lot that you kind of, it's unknown and ambiguous, and you have to just kind of see how it goes because everyone's going to handle things differently. Um, so I think that that's another really big challenge is just the unknowns really about what recovery is going to look like, and where for one person maybe it's 2 weeks and for another maybe it's 3 months, and you just have to kind of get through it. um, what else about concussion specifically? I think also the ways that you have to recover, there's no physical therapy. You just have to be alone, isolated in a dark room with no stimuli, and um, sleeping a lot, and it's a very lonely and isolated recovery process.
And I suppose injury can be isolating at the best of times, but
Right,
for a musculoskeletal injury, athletes presumably can surround themselves with others or still,
right,
seek out that connection. But
yeah,
that's not the case with concussion, particularly in the early stages.
right.
You indicated, Shayla, that you still experience some symptoms years after your retirement. How long
Yeah.
ago did you complete your swimming?
So I finished in October of 2017. So October of 2020 will be 3 years.
3 years. Um, I just got a notice here that there's some installed software and my
Oh,
computer may restart. So if
okay.
that's the case, maybe we can just do a new Zoom. I'll
That's
send you a
great.
new link.
Yep, no
Um,
problem.
okay. Um, so, and do you feel that some of the symptoms that you may still experience, is that because you've had repeated concussions?
Um, that's a really good question. I'm not sure. My guess is probably, but I couldn't say for sure.
Yeah, sure. Um, you've talked about some of the uncertainties, particularly about the nature of concussion. Are there uncertainties in terms of kind of recovery and return to play that you experienced in particular?
Yeah, I think there was a time in particular. I mean, in all my concussions, I had experiences of returning to play too quickly and then needing to go back to recovery. And with the first concussion in particular, um, I think I just got bored of being going through the recovery process, and I was like, "Hey, like, come on, chop chop, we're done. Like, I'm fine." And so went back and did not ease into things and tried to go back full throttle. And um, so yeah, there was a lot of like kind of figuring out what works and what doesn't work. And in terms of the uncertainties, that took the head athletic trainer sat me down and said, and he had more experience with concussion in athletes, kind of throughout his career. Um, and he said something to the effect of, do you want to swim right now or do you want to play with your kids later? And I was like, oh, is that where we're at? Like, is this the magnitude? Like it hadn't really hit me what was at stake and how big things were. And that really impressed upon me, like, okay, this is not something I need to mess around with right now. This is something that I need to focus on recovering fully from.
Yeah. So maybe you can talk a little bit about the importance of receiving information and education.
Yeah, I mean, I think I learned the most by going through it, which I wouldn't recommend to anybody as a learning tool. But I think that uh, anytime, and it shockingly happened a lot, that there were teammates that I had who had concussions. So anytime that they had concussions, I tried to talk to them about what I'd gone through, what helped me to recover, and um, like pain management strategies that I felt were helpful. Um, excuse me. And uh, I would just recommend, like, if you are going through a concussion and know somebody who has, talk to them and ask them how they did it and tell them how hard it is, and like just try and seek out that support, because people just, they don't know and they don't know how to help. And if you can ask for help, I know it's hard, but that'll be the best way forward.
And in terms of pain management strategies for managing either the physical symptoms of concussion or maybe even the emotional or
Hmm.
cognitive symptoms, do you have any suggestions at all? Or
Yeah, I mean, the biggest things for me, one thing is I started taking fish oil supplements, which is not super tested, but fish oil is good for brain health. So I figured if it wasn't going to hurt me, I would try anything. And I don't really like to eat fish anyway, so it's a great way to get that vitamin. So that was something that I started doing right away. And then also, um, I would I had like a kind of like a heat pack, I would say. My roommate's mom makes them, and they're, I don't know how else to describe it, but you could use like a hot water bottle or anything. And I would just lay on my bed with my head hanging off of the edge of the bed and then put the heat pack on my forehead. And that would help relieve some of the pressure there as well as in the back of my neck. Um, and massage was huge for for my neck and like upper back. um, just like being able to function, it would relieve so much of the pressure.
Mhm.
um, Tylenol was huge as well. And I would say I tried really hard not to just depend on it, but at least once a day I would typically have like 2 Tylenol,
Yeah.
in order to kind of manage the pain. Um, and then in terms of the psychological aspects of pain management, because it was painful psychologically, I would say I relied heavily on a mental health therapist as well as a sports psychologist. Um, like if you just don't have access to those things, I would say just talking to a friend about what's going on for you is really important. And like just anything that you can do to kind of share what you're feeling, even if it's
Yeah.
like talking to your cat or something, like just getting it out feels
Yeah.
really, really nice, because
Yeah.
it's just going to rattle around in there if you don't.
Right. Right. You mentioned kind of sharing, speaking with other people or sharing your thoughts. How was that beneficial, or how could that be beneficial?
Well, I think it's just like, um, it's kind of a relief for everybody involved, because the people who care about you are concerned and don't know how to help and don't know what to say and don't know what to do, but they want to do something, and not doing anything feels bad. And so if you're able to like say, hey, I hate today. Can you send me a funny dog video? And they can do that. Like, that makes them feel good, and it makes you feel good, because you can ask for the things that you want and they can deliver that. And
Right.
it can just be like a nice, I don't know, just acknowledgement that things aren't great. And that's all that needs to happen. Nobody needs to fix anything. And I think that the biggest thing is feeling like someone is there witnessing with you that it's hard and it's painful and it's uncomfortable and it's not getting better very fast, and that's really hard and challenging.
Yeah. So just having someone who's empathetic or
Yes.
understanding, who can appreciate all of the multitude of difficulties or challenges is worthwhile.
Yes. Yes. And I think um, somebody who is able to make you not feel like you are um, a burden or a problem or bad or damaged or like flawed for this happening to you is really huge. I don't quite know, like how to find those people, but they're there. And you can even tell other people who maybe aren't filling that role that that's kind of more what you need right now. Um, and if coaches are pressuring you or making you feel like this, you have to return to play quickly, then I think like trying to find somebody who can advocate for you, if you don't feel that you can advocate for yourself, is really important.
So maybe you can speak to the point or issue about athletes seeking out the types of support that they need.
Mm. I think it's super important. And I think that if you can just try a bunch of different things out, then that's important too, and a good thing to try, because you don't necessarily know what you need until you get it. And it can be kind of like a weight off your shoulders when you do finally find it. But it's definitely hard and challenging to figure out like maybe who that person is to talk to, or what that thing you need somebody to say to you, or thing you need to share with somebody is. um, and so just like being gentle with yourself as you figure out what you need, I think is definitely important.
Mm. And you mentioned earlier, in particular for you, there's maybe a tendency to be self-critical, or
Right.
often athletes are kind of hard in their judgments
Hmm.
about themselves or their performance. And so I like kind of how you phrase that about, taking it easy on yourself, or,
Yes.
um, you know, cutting yourself slack, for lack of a
Hmm.
better expression.
Yeah.
Maybe you can speak to that a bit more.
Yeah, and I'm kind of laughing as we're talking. I'm realizing it's very easy for me to say when I'm thinking about somebody else talking or like going through this or hearing this, but it was not that easy for me to do for myself. And I think that, yeah, I don't know what the solution is. It's really, really hard to
Yeah.
practice that self-compassion, but um like you're worth it and it's important and you matter, and like this journey is a journey, and one day will be really hard and one day will be a little bit better, and two steps forward, one step back.
Would you say the self-compassion when one is injured, or taking it easy on oneself during their injury process, is maybe antithetical or contrary to the athlete mindset?
Absolutely. I think that, um, I mean, we're taught like trust the process and no pain, no gain, and everything should be hard and grueling. And sometimes the most important thing to do is to take care of yourself, which looks like a lot of different things. But one of the things it might look like is laying in bed all day with the lights off. And that is like you are doing the work in those moments that you need to be doing. It doesn't look the same as it did yesterday, but that work is even more important than what you were doing yesterday, because you can't do your weight training or your laps in the pool if you don't do this work right now.
Right. And so, doing the work of recovery specifically for concussion may involve things that are, you know, challenging, or kind of contrary to one's habits and patterns, or usual ways of training. As you said, like pushing
Right.
through pain, more is better. In this case, having to do less, or nothing at all, lying down. It sounds
Mhm.
like that may be particularly arduous or challenging.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it was really, it feels really debilitating, especially if you're living with a fellow athlete, or if you are, your friends are fellow athletes and they're still going through, um, what feels like and looks like harder things, like physically more draining activities. Um, and yeah, bottom line, it's hard.
Mhm. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how thoughts and emotions change over the course of the concussion experience, from
Yeah.
occurrence to trying to resume activities and return to play.
Yeah, I think just from my experience, each one was a little bit different, but the biggest commonality was it was all over the place. One day was pretty good, the next day was really bad. And then I would say in the beginning, I kind of had this mindset of like, okay, I got this. Like, I know how to take care of myself. I can do this. Let's go. Especially with the second two concussions, it was like, I've done this before. I know the drill. Let's get this process going. Um, but eventually it gets really daunting again, and it gets really overwhelming, and it feels like you're never going to get better. And I think that the biggest thing for me was like remembering why I was doing it, and making sure that it was still worth it and still like felt like something that was going to bring me happiness and reward and like self-efficacy essentially. um, and once I got the third one and it became clear that it was no longer the case, like I wasn't going to be able to recover in a time frame that would allow me to have a really positive end, then there was actually a lot of empowerment in taking myself out of the sport and kind of like deciding, okay, that's it. Like this is I I could choose to keep pushing and keep making it really painful and hard for myself,
Mm.
or I can just decide that like who I am and what I need is more important than this sport, even though the sport is amazing and I really cherish it.
Yeah.
So I just think it's important to have that, like, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. And the most important path forward is the one that's best for you, not what's best for anybody else.
Mhm. Was that hard to come to terms with, the idea that sport or competitive swimming wasn't going to be part of your future moving forward?
Absolutely. And I think it was so much more wrapped up in my identity than I had realized. I mean, I think that it really, I took that on at a pretty young age before I like had a choice not to, in a sense. Like I was already swimming at a really high level before I ever thought like, do I want to be doing this? And I think that something that I had so like unconsciously incorporated into who I was, it was really jarring to suddenly not have that. But it was also really helpful for me to be still involved with the team and still coaching on deck and being a part of things in the way that I could. And that helped make the transition
Yeah.
as easy as it could be.
I just want to go back to that point that you made about after, maybe it was after your first or your second concussion, where the prospect of further participation was still open or available to you.
Mm-hmm.
And you were talking about some of your thoughts and emotions, and I think you indicated that kind of coming back or getting in touch with your motivations for why you want to swim
Mm-hmm.
was useful or important.
Yeah, I think it was.
Accurate.
And I think, yeah, I think it was kind of a combination of like, I had only really had 1 year before I got the concussion, and I was at the end of like my second season, which had up to that point been kind of not what I wanted. So I still had that fight a little bit of like, no, I think there's still more left. I think I have more to give. I think I can do better. I want to do better. I want to see this through. Like, kind of all those things were really kind of helped me get through that recovery process, because there was something more that I felt I still needed to do and accomplish.
Mhm. So maybe you can talk a little bit about the role or importance of motivation in recovery from concussion.
Sure, yeah. I think it's up and down, like I've said, in terms of one day you'll know why you're working through it, and the next day you'll be like, I don't care anymore, nothing matters, whatever, I give up. But I think just baseline, if you're, whatever your injury may be, you want to recover so that you're a whole human being first and foremost. And I think that sometimes gets lost in the recovery process, because it's like, oh, I want to get better because I need to get back to my sport, or I have this competition or whatever. And I think remembering that, like, you still want to be a functioning human and you want to be happy and healthy, and the first step to that is getting your body back to the place where it was. That's a huge motivator in and of itself. um, if you need to take sport out of it for whatever reason, like for me it was kind of an up and down roller coaster that season with the sport itself, but I knew that for my own sake I wanted to get better.
So what do you attribute the fact that, it sounds like some days there's high levels of motivation or clear sense of why you want to come back and,
Mm-hmm.
why you're committed, and other days sounds like you want to throw in the towel. What do you attribute those ups and downs, I guess, or ebbs and flows in motivation to?
Um, I think it's probably a lot of different factors, as most things are, but I think in my case it was feeling a little bit disconnected from my teammates and my coaches, would make me feel less motivated. Um, and then I think on days when I felt more supported and kind of seen in my recovery process, whether it was by an athletic trainer or a coach or a teammate or whoever it was, that made me certainly more motivated to come back and really like take ownership over my recovery.
So would you say maintaining a connection to people in your sport, whether it's your coach or teammates or athletic trainers, is that important in terms of
Absolutely.
recovery?
Yeah, I think that's huge.
Hmm.
And if like I think it's on the athlete to a certain degree to maintain that level of social support, but I also think that it's imperative that athletic trainers, coaches in particular, are checking in and making sure that athlete is like acknowledged, and they're kind of keeping track of the progress, even if it's something like a concussion where there may not be day-to-day progress, even if they're just checking in and saying, hey, I see that you're there still, and I want you to know that I'm here. I think that that's really important because teammates are pretty constant, like they're typically pretty good at checking in, but I think it's really impactful when a coach or a trainer is kind of invested in that process as well.
Right. So those individuals in particular, and what, I mean, when you mentioned checking in, is that like, what would you say is sufficient? Is it once
Um,
a week, once a day, once a month?
um, from my experience, anything would be nice.
Uh,
um, I think that I, as the athlete, felt a lot of responsibility to update people, and I didn't feel that they necessarily cared. They just wanted, like, it's a little bit like I was an investment, and they wanted to make sure their investment was like being taken care of in a sense.
mhm.
Um, it felt pretty transactional, so I think that making sure like seeing your athletes as humans is a good goes a long way.
Right.
And kind of acknowledging that.
Right. So you mentioned the word care, being cared for, and it sounds like in your experience, the onus was on you to reach out to others. But am I correct in suggesting that, or what I think you're suggesting is it's beneficial, particularly if a coach or athletic trainer reaches out to you, the injured athlete, and shows that they care about you as a person or in an individual, and they care about your recovery?
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's huge. And in terms of like what is sufficient, I would say, I mean, like once a week, a text or something would be huge.
Yeah. Okay. So it doesn't have to even be time intensive, or but
No.
even just like a short text
Yeah. Yeah.
is worthwhile.
Yep.
Great. Great. Um, Maybe you can talk a little bit about the role of expectations
Mm.
and how that might impact your recovery. And I guess it could be expectations in relation to other people or about the process of recovery,
Hmm.
or expectations in general related to the injury itself.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I think that in my experience, it was the biggest expectation was the one that I was placing on myself. And I think that's probably going to be the case for a lot of athletes dealing with this because we can be very driven, motivated, self critical, just, wanting to do the best and be the best. But I think the combination of my own expectations and then what I was perceiving to be the expectations of my coaches and teammates um, kind of combined to make the recovery process a lot harder. And I think about this a lot. Once I made the decision to stop swimming after that third concussion, I think I was going through the recovery process for like a few weeks. It wasn't an immediate, like I didn't get the third concussion and then it was like, okay, that's it, I'm done. I really gave it a try and I, you know, went through, tried to come back and it just wasn't happening. Anyways, so I was still having symptoms really badly every day, and was spending like an hour every evening just like symptom management, like like rubbing my neck and trying to relieve the pressure, whatever I could do. And it was impacting my ability to do my schoolwork, and I couldn't do anything. I just had to manage, essentially. And once I made the decision to stop swimming, it was like within an hour I started to feel better. Like my headache kind of lessened, and the pressure in my neck was kind of better, and everything felt just like this huge weight off of my shoulders. And I think that that's, to your question, that was 100% the expectation of how I needed to recover and the speed at which I needed to recover and when I should be back and what I should be back and able to do was huge and was really weighing on me in that recovery process.
I think your point, and you articulated so nicely, really speaks to the connection of mind and body,
Yeah,
and how, those expectations that you were placing upon yourself, it sounds like they intensified or exacerbated your symptoms, and
absolutely.
almost like when they were gone, like kind of a backpack, a heavy weight, I
Yeah.
guess you mentioned, being lifted. Um, and so, maybe, I guess, if you were sort of talking to other athletes about expectations and how they might be beneficial or conversely detrimental, what would you say?
I mean, I would say lower them. Start there. Like, whatever your expectations are of what your recovery process will look like, um, lower your expectations of how quickly you think that you should be back or how soon. If you can just not give yourself a timeline or a time frame, I think that's even better. Um, if again, finding somebody who can kind of help advocate for you in those situations, um, and help, be that bridge between you and your coach. Maybe it's your athletic trainer, maybe it's a psychologist or mental health or sports psychologists, like any of those types of people who can kind of speak to like what you're mentally working with as you recover. um, I think is super, super important, because a lot of times we're not able to articulate what's going on, as well as just the dynamic of a coach athlete relationship is a lot different than a coach, I don't know, support staff relationship.
Yeah.
So just trying to find those people who can help you manage the expectations that are put upon you, and then doing your best to manage your own expectations.
It's interesting that you mentioned timelines and timeframes and trying to almost do away with that.
Mm.
Earlier in our discussion, I believe you talked about the fact that at a certain point you were just keen to get back to sport, particularly it sounds like after your first concussion, and that so you know I I just wonder if your sort of post-injury self would
Yeah, I think
act
there's,
differently than your pre-injury
yes,
self in some way.
absolutely. I think there's two versions of myself, and one is like, I just want to wrap my old self up and like give her a hug because it was just a really hard time.
Mhm.
And then there's also like pre/during injury. I remember really clearly how I felt and how impatient I was. Um, so I think there's, you'll learn and grow as you go through it, and figure it out along the way, for sure.
Maybe you can talk a little bit about this idea of an injured athlete meeting certain criteria before they return to sport versus a time frame.
Yeah, I think meeting criteria versus a time frame would be a big step in the right direction if you're someone who is like helping create a treatment plan for an athlete or working with an athlete to do that. um, because I think that it's so important to have tangible if I can do X, then I can do Y. Like you kind of build up on those steps as you work towards returning to play. So I think that that's really important. But I think that, yeah, I'm kind of stumped a little bit because it's also just hard to know that you're not meeting that, and it's discouraging.
Yeah.
But it's also discouraging to think that I was supposed to be at this point 2 weeks post injury and I'm not, and there's pros and cons, I think, to both ways.
Sure.
So just managing what works best for the athlete is really important.
So would you say kind of managing timeframes and expectations is important for impacting athletes' kind of thoughts, emotions?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think in some respects it's good to have the athlete kind of lead the charge, but I also think that it would have been really helpful for me to have somebody else kind of more guiding me than they were. It felt very much like I was in charge and it was all on my terms, and that was a lot to cope with and manage and figure out how to react to and respond to and appropriately follow.
Right.
So I think that um, if you're someone in a position who has some medical authority, like an athletic trainer or a team doctor or something, physical therapist, whatever it is, then I think that like helping guide the treatment plan is really important.
So would that take some of the weight of responsibility off of, or would it have taken the responsibility off your shoulders?
Yeah, I think absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you you were being asked at times, well, how do you feel? Do you feel ready? And I guess those are, of course, important questions to get the athlete input, but also kind of, um, I guess, not just to sort of fully have the onus on the athlete to be making
Yeah,
decisions about when they feel ready.
right.
Do you
Well,
feel like,
and one thing on that, I think if you can operate, like obviously everyone's going to know their athlete best, but it's probably safest to operate with the assumption that they are going to like overwork themselves or over promise or try and over achieve in this recovery process. So it's going to be someone's job to try and hold them back.
Mhm.
And it's really important to whoever it is to do that job, because it's really problematic if nobody
Mhm.
does that.
So on that note, do you think that your desire to return or to please, as you mentioned, or your interest in competing, did that cloud your judgment about your readiness to return?
I think it definitely did. And I don't know. I don't know how things would have been different, but it took a lot to talk me out of coming back, or like when I would come back and it was clearly too soon. It was um I wasn't gonna stop, essentially. So it really took somebody um really holding me back in a sense,
Mhm.
and making sure that I understood the stakes. Like I said before, someone saying, do you want to swim now or do you want to play with your kids later? And kind of the magnitude of that really kind of slapped me in the face.
Yeah. And I imagine, particularly when someone's young and aspiring to athletic achievement and highly motivated to hone your skills and excel, that that's hard sometimes to get that information, but also it sounds like very important and worthwhile.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah. Um, Maybe you can talk a little bit about, and you have alluded to this, but maybe you can speak a little bit about the importance of clear communication between an injured athlete and their coach, or specific instances where communication was optimal or less than optimal with your treatment providers.
Yeah, I think clear communication is huge. and was very lacking in my experience. And I think that what that ended up doing for me was I made up like expectations and needs from my coaches because they weren't telling me anything, and they were always a lot more severe and intense than if I had just asked them. Because at some point, I would be like, okay, here's what I'm thinking, like I'm gonna come back, and I'm not totally supposed to be in the water yet, but I think I'm gonna come and I'm gonna do the spin bike on deck at practice, and I'll do it X number of days a week for this long, blah blah blah. And they were always like, what? Like, you're just, don't worry about it, essentially. So I think that communicating with the athlete about what you understand to be reasonable for them to be doing, and talking with them and the athletic trainer or doctor, whoever is kind of helping lead the recovery, um, and making like a cohesive team out of it would be huge, uh, because I think a lot of teams will have the experience where like team coaches and staff will talk, and maybe the athletic trainer is like involved in that, and then the athlete is just completely left out and they don't know what the coaches are thinking. Maybe the athletic trainer isn't communicating what the coaches have said, or that they've talked to the coaches. So it's just like, if you could streamline and kind of make that a more cohesive conversation, I think that would be huge.
So to have some systems in place to facilitate more clear communication between the athlete and the sport medicine practitioners
Yeah.
and the coach, and those kind of three components, I guess, or hubs in the wheel, would be important.
Yeah.
You also mentioned the importance of communication about what's reasonable in terms of activities or
Mhm.
guidelines, for what one should or shouldn't be doing.
Right.
Are there other elements to effective communication or clear communication that are important for recovering athletes?
Um, I think those were the big ones from my experience.
Mhm.
Yeah, that I can think
Okay,
of.
okay. Um, just a few other questions, Shayla, and
Yeah.
I really appreciate all of your insights. Maybe you can talk a little bit. We're discussing this idea of some criteria or timelines for readiness to resume competitive activities, and maybe you can talk about the importance of being psychologically ready to
Mm.
return to sport.
Yeah, I think that's huge. I think the biggest thing that I wish that I had done psychologically is, um, like, truly waited until I was ready. And I don't think that that's possible for everybody to do, but um, I think it would have been longer. I think I would have recovered more fully. And I think I would have been more excited and motivated and ready to come back to training. And I probably would have been able to, instead of coming back a little bit too early and then having to take more recovery time, I probably would have been able to successfully reintegrate and return to play in
Mhm.
one go, as opposed to feeling like I should, but I knew that I wasn't ready, and then kind of two steps back.
Yeah. So again, you kind of mentioned motivation and feeling ready before you returned, and not sort of rushing it. How would you know, or how could an injured athlete know, particularly a concussed athlete, if they're psychologically ready?
Mhm.
Like, are there signs or indicators of
Yeah,
psychological readiness?
that's a great question. I think one of the things for me that was really hard about the concussion, and was like kind of a measure that I knew I was at least somewhat back to normal, was just feeling like ready for my day was kind of the smallest indicator, and feeling like excited about something again. Because I think I certainly slipped into a fairly deep depression, and I think it was pretty much timed with my recovery that I came out of it. Like as I was feeling more able and alert and back to normal, that depression kind of went away. Um, so I don't know that there's like, you'll wake up one morning and be like, hooray, now today's the day. But I felt like after maybe like a couple of weeks of feeling like, okay, I can do all my normal tasks that I usually do. I don't have um, unmanageable pain or discomfort throughout my day. Um, just kind of things like that that are markers. It helped me to keep like a journal to monitor symptoms and stuff, um, because it like like with the concussion, it was a 3-month recovery after the first one, so you get kind of like bogged down in your day to day. It's hard to keep track of like what was last week and how did I feel. So I think if you want to kind of keep track of those things, then that can be helpful to know when you do actually start to feel better consistently, and you can track it a little bit more readily.
Yeah, so I think that's a great point about being able to kind of monitor your symptoms, and things like keeping track through diaries or
Yeah.
other means may be helpful, just to get a sense of, how you're feeling with your energy or your vitality or
Hmm.
emotions or completing day-to-day tasks,
Absolutely.
not having physical symptoms. um, yeah, those all sound like important indicators, I guess, of readiness, particularly in the case of concussion.
Right.
Um, do you think there are certain factors that distinguish athletes who make a successful return versus those who don't? And
Mm.
I guess success could be defined in different ways.
I mean, I think that athletes who make a successful return are typically doing it on their own timeline and not worried about what people will say or think or how they should be doing it. And I think that the other side of that is sometimes you don't, and that's okay too, really.
Mhm.
And like, kind of like I was saying earlier, can you make a successful return to like your life? And that's bottom line, the most important piece of recovery, really.
Um, you've mentioned this at different points, but going back to that point about challenges or concerns, it sounds like you had some preoccupation with other, the evaluations or opinions of others.
Sure.
Would that be an accurate statement, or?
Yes, 100%. And I felt like um, that may have just been a particular team culture and environment that I was experiencing, because it felt very like if you were swimming fast, then you were like a favorite. And if you weren't, you were not really important.
Mhm.
And I think that that's probably a fairly common experience that people have, even though it's a real bummer. And I think that if you're someone who can impact your team culture, like a coach or a captain or somebody like that, um, I think that if you can help people who are going through the injury recovery process and make sure that the team brings them along, if that makes sense, like it's keeps them kind of with the team, I think that's going to be a really positive thing for a successful return to play.
Yeah. So again, keeping the athlete integrated in the team routines,
Yeah.
or you know, maybe you can elaborate, and sort of keeping them involved in what capacity, I guess, would be my question.
I mean, I would say whatever is possible. Like if it's like we had a group chat, like just a texting group thread, and sometimes people would say something specifically to me and other people would chime in. That was really nice. I would say if there are team events that people could still go to and participate in, that would be really important. Like I don't know if there's like gatherings or whatever that might look like, social events.
Mhm.
I know that if you have some kind of like a physical injury and you can do rehab, um, maybe while your team is doing their own practice, so you're still kind of like showing up and they can see you and everybody's like still part of it. I think that would be helpful. Yeah, those are the main things that would come to mind.
Yeah, those are all great points and thoughts. And my last question is, if you had one piece of advice that you would share or could share with injured athletes, what would it be?
Um, I don't know how uplifting it is, but I would say that like it was really a big deal to me to stop swimming. Um, but I would just say that it was really helpful to remember that I was a person outside of my sport.
Mhm.
And at the end of the day, swimming did not matter as much as my own health and well being. And just kind of whether you're an athlete who's injured or a um, teammate or a athletic trainer or a sports psychologist or whoever, a coach, I think trying to treat the athlete as a person first is really important and really helpful in the recovery process, because like that kind of addresses all the things that we've really talked about, like the motivation and the expectations and everything. Like if you can think first and foremost of the athlete or yourself, if it's you, as a human being who just needs to be whole and healthy and well and functioning in your daily life outside of sport, I think you're going to take better care of yourself and like focus on that more than if you try and prioritize getting back to your sport, because there's just so much wrapped up in what that means and what that will look like.
Those are very sage and wise words, and I think a wonderful statement to finish our discussion. So thank you very much, Shayla. I really appreciate all of your insights, and really, I think it's great to speak to you because maybe if there are some benefits to your injury experience, and certainly your willingness to share, I'm sure can have positive impacts for others. So thank you very
Yeah,
much. I
you're
appreciate
so
it.
welcome. You're so welcome. And I hope I can have positive impact for somebody. That would be wonderful.